we'll get to more from that game and we'll get to more from the weekend split, but we're not going to make him wait any longer because he's waiting in the wings. He's ready to get in here. Jay Rosehill, our pal, is brought to you today by our friends at Four Winds Brewing, family owned and operated in Delta, home to the Four Winds Light Lager, a crisp, clean, and easy drinking beer, a beer for everyone, a perfect beer for before, after, or during the game. Ask for Four Winds Light Lager at your local liquor store or have some delivered right to your front door through the online shop at fourwindsbrewing.ca. Okay, we've got Jay. Jay is the host of Leafs Morning Take. He's also the host of Department of Discipline, two shows within our network. And this is Jay. I think this is the first time we've ever met, but I really wanted to get his opinion, much like we had John Scott on the show like a few weeks ago. I wanted to get Jay on the show to talk about a few things because, Jay, I'm not sure if you've heard, the Toronto Maple Leafs are in the headlines right now.
I noticed there's things going on lately. It's kind of a spicy Monday morning, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, yes it is. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And we'll start right there. Obviously, it was the cross-check heard around the hockey world that came at the end of that game between the Ottawa Senators and Toronto Maple Leafs. I think we're gonna have a few questions on the whole ordeal, but what's your initial take on what went down there?
Yeah, well, I was watching it live, and I mean, I watched him wind up and take that clapper that was honestly with more effort than anyone did in the hardest shot competition in the All-Star game. It was a clear big FU to the Maple Leafs, and I saw Morgan Rielly go right after him, and I absolutely loved it. But what I wasn't a fan of is the fact that he cross-checked him right in the head. I mean, there's a lot of wiggle room in between doing nothing and cross-checking him in the head, and it's my honest opinion that it wasn't in his intent to go and give him that shot right to the head. Kind of crawled up on him, which can happen when you cross-check. But at the end of the day, it's you got to be in control of your own stick, and he's gonna pay the piper here about it. But as far as the actual response itself to what he did, I was all for it.
You're obviously a former player. You've been in NHL locker rooms. You've played in intense, passionate games. That, of course, anytime you have the Battle of Ontario, it's going to be such an emotional, intense type of atmosphere. If you were an Ottawa Senator and you're in that locker room, what would your thought on Greg loading up for that slap shot would be? Because some people are thinking it's such a heat of the moment thing, and Greg's a player that plays with a chip on his shoulder. And look, if it happens, it happens. Not that, of course, you want it happening regularly, but some people don't have a problem with it. Others say you don't want to cross the line and give the opponents a reason to go after you.
Yeah, I mean, he's fully able to make that call and do that. I got no problem with. You can do whatever you want. You can act like Brad Marchand out there. You can act like Mario Lemieux. You can do whatever you want. It's your career, and you have the ability to act how you want. But if you're going to do things like that, expect a response back. I mean, this game's good. The guys have a lot of pride and honor and integrity within the game and how they feel towards their teammates and the organization that they play for. And if you're going to throw, a big two fingers in the air right at the team that you're playing after an empty netter, right? That's what that is. It's going to elicit a response. It would elicit a response in a beer league hockey game. You go and wind up a huge clapper to finish the game and put the nail in the coffin in that fashion. It's going to piss some people off, especially when you have these high-end athletes that are just, full of passion, intensity, and competitiveness. It's going to piss people off. So he's free to go and do that, but don't be surprised when a guy comes at you and doesn't like it. That's what I'm saying. And if he didn't realize it was going to elicit a response, then, well, obviously he does now, but also, he was a little bit naive being a young guy in the league thinking that that's just going to go off without a hitch.
Two questions. How many games do you think Rielly will get suspended? How many games do you think he should get suspended?
I think he's going to get 5 or 6. I can't decide if they're going to go over the 5. I think it's going to be 5, being as it's an in-person. I think he should get I think he should get 2 for it. I think it sends the message. I don't think he's a guy that's out there that does that all the time, that tries to do it. I think if you look at it from the one angle, he clearly goes right at his shoulder, bounces right off his shoulder and slides up into his head. Once he realizes he's up in that danger zone, he completely lets go of his stick. that doesn't mean he's not responsible for it. You're responsible for what happens with your stick, whether that was your intention or not. And you go and give a guy a cross check higher on the shoulder, there's a chance it's going to come up and be around the guy's head. So he should pay the piper to a degree. But I mean, a 5-6 game suspension for that, when I just don't see the consistency in the suspensions where you see other guys doing, more vicious things that, I mean, Leafland, obviously right now, Leafs Nation is pulling up all kinds of incidents against the Leafs that got 0 games that were much more vicious. So the consistency is never there. And it's always a coin flip on, who's going to be right with the suspensions. But I have a feeling he's going to get 5 or 6. And I just think that's too much.
You mentioned inconsistency from the league. How hard is it? You and Ryan Pinder every Thursday do an episode called Department of Discipline. That show, you and Pinder. How hard is it to do a show about suspensions when you really have no idea what the NHL is going to do on any given day? Because we just saw Zadorov, and we'll ask you about that, but Zadorov gets 2 games as well. How's that show been so far, though?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, that show touches on everything. Obviously, under the Hockey Fights label, they've got the fighting side of things that we touch on, but it's really anything cultural, anything that's going on in the game. We've touched on the 2018 World Juniors saga, the Milan Lucic stuff, the suspensions that are going on. And, whenever this stuff happens, it's more things to talk about, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of that this year. But yeah, you break down what happened, you compare it to other incidents, other players, compare it on what franchise this is, what the history is, what you think their reputation is. And it's not an easy job for George Parros. I don't claim that for a second. I think if I was doing that job, I do not think I would be perfect at it, and there'd be a lot of pissed off people if I was calling the shots. But I think one thing that you really got to try to nail down in that situation is being consistent. And so far, that's proven to be difficult.
What do you think Rielly's saying in the appeal process? Like, what does the appeal process actually look like for a player going in person? Obviously, it's tomorrow, right? Tuesday, Rielly's going. What does the appeal process look like?
Yeah, I haven't been through it personally, but I imagine you're going to sit down, and I don't know how formal it's going to be or how much time they have to actually converse, as people. But I imagine Rielly will be able to say his piece as far as, look, this was a clearly unsportsmanlike thing. I know it's not in the rule book, but George Parros, as much as anyone, understands that type of thing, and that's going to elicit a response. I was going up to him to give him a shot and stand up for my team and for my own pride and where I am. And he's going to have to show that, yeah, look, I went at his shoulder, it bounced up and hit. You can see I let go with my one hand first and then dropped my stick entirely when I realized, oh, geez, I got him up in that dangerous area. And he can plead his case that way. But at the end of the day, he's going to have to take responsibility and say, I know I screwed up. I know I'm going to get suspended for this. And, there's a bunch of other things I could have done that wouldn't warrant a suspension, that would have sent the same message. And he's going to have to own that. And at the end of the day, if that together, changes the NHL's decision on what their number of games is going to be, I can't imagine it is. I imagine they have it in their mind already. But anytime you get that in-person hearing, it's kind of nice. You get to go plead your case. But on the other hand, it never turns out well for the player when they have to go in and do a face-to-face.
On Saturday, Nikita Zadorov stepped up on the blue line, hit Lucas Raymond, got the 5-minute major, tossed from the game, ultimately suspended for 2 games. What did you think of the hit and the suspension? Was it fair?
Yeah, like the hit, it's, he's cutting across on his edge backwards, kind of one of those hits that defensemen type to make. And usually it's up against the glass. This one happens to be open ice. And it's just, he's on his trail leg with his heel leading. So to have any agility at that point in time, at that speed, it's difficult to line the guy up perfectly. But he clips his head, and that's the biggest problem, right? And of course, Raymond has the theatrics after of sliding on his knees and arcing his back and then sliding and then flopping face first. And, oh, look at everyone, make sure the spotlight's on me for this. And that's fine. It's his MO. But when you're hitting guys today's day and age, where the NHL stands on it. They want to play hockey without hitting players' heads. So if you're going to go hit a guy, you got to get their full body. You got to get the trunk and the main mass of his body, and you can't just clip his chin or his head. I mean, that is how you get concussions. That is what they're trying to pull back on. So I understand the league needing to do something about it. The game amount, I expected. It is what it is. And, every time there's a suspension like that, there's a few here in the last week, and it seems like there's two common themes. One is the guy that gets hit always seems to look like he doesn't even realize they're playing body contact hockey, like complete head up his backside, going through the middle, completely in a vulnerable position that he's put himself in. No onus to protect himself at all. And then the person that's hitting them is not able to get the full body, and they clip a head and clip a face or clip their chin. And that's just an immediate reaction from the league is going to be to suspend that player, whether that original player put himself in a vulnerable spot or not. They don't seem to care at all. They want to knock down the headshots and make that a suspendable offense. And right now in the NHL, it's a full contact sport that you're not allowed to touch the guy's head on. So until that changes, and it's not going to change, we're going to have these arguments and these incidents where guys are getting suspended for what some people consider a clean hit, or what used to be a clean hit, or a guy didn't protect himself, or it's the guy that got hit's fault for leading with his head, and all these different things. But as long as you're playing hit hockey where you can't hit the guy's head, you're going to run into these problems all the time.
How hard do you think that is then for like a guy like Zadorov, who, he plays kind of on that edge? It's a fine line, obviously, of playing very physical, being a larger than life human being with Zadorov. Like, how hard is it now in kind of the modern era NHL where everything you just outlined is present in the game?
It's extremely hard. I mean, the game is so fast, it would blow your mind. And to take a video and then take the third or fourth angle of it and break it down in super slow-mo and kind of peel the layers back in there. See right there, the first point of contact was his head. Like, do you have any idea how impossible that is to navigate during the course of an NHL shift where two bodies are colliding? You're going to make a body check. And I really like Zadorov. I was excited for you guys when you got him. I think he's got a lot of upside, and I love players that play with that jam and that want to go take the body. But, it's just unfortunate to me that the more the NHL comes down on these guys' hits and the way they're suspending them for these body checks, it seems like the more that other players are putting themselves in vulnerable positions, assuming that they're not allowed to get hit anymore. And it's just compounding on itself with guys turning their back to the guy that's hitting them, leading with their head, looking behind them, going through the middle, crazy things like that, where you're just asking for injuries. So it would just be nice if guys, protected themselves a little bit more and got their shoulder up and understood when they're in dangerous areas and got up on their edge and protected themselves from these body checks. And I think a lot of it would go away. But until then, the onus is going to be on the guy hitting them. And, it's tough because guys want to lay body checks and be physical, and it's a big part of the game. But more and more players I see are scared to do it because, they don't know if the guy's going to turn at the last second or lead with his head, and you're going to catch a piece of his chin. And then, you lose hundreds of thousands of dollars and hurt your team, and you're suspended. And now you got a reputation, and it's on your permanent record, so to speak. It's difficult position to be in for those physical players.
Jay, good stuff. Thanks so much for taking the time today, and we'll do it again soon.
You bet, guys. Appreciate it.
And that was Jay Rosehill. You can check him out, like I said earlier, on the Department of Discipline podcast, and of course, Leafs Morning Take with our pal Nick Alberga over on Leafs Nation. I know all the Canucks fans want to go watch a Leafs show, but they have good stuff. They've had Bruce on numerous times, Bruce Boudreau, of course. They've had him on before, and they do a really good show. Even if you're not a Leafs fan, they do a good show. Harmon, let's continue before we get to anyone else in our few more ads that we have to get through. Let's continue talking about the Canucks weekend games. Anything else you want to say about Detroit? Because I think Jay put it pretty well with the Zadorov suspension. Again, I wasn't really expecting him to get suspended, but you look at the hit, it's a hard one to like dissect, because it's kind of like Jay said, when you look at it for like a bunch of different angles, then you start to really peel into it. And I don't know, it wasn't a good hit. It wasn't a good hit, but also, the player returned. And I know a lot of people say, and I agree with them to some extent, that like a player being injured shouldn't impact in a suspension. But in my opinion, Zadorov missed most of that game because he got thrown out early in the second period. He gets there's the 5-minute penalty, and then I didn't know if it should have been more, definitely not more than a game. I didn't think, but I also thought it would have just been a fine based on the NHL's history. And I tweeted this out and I had to defend this, right? Like I had to defend this on Twitter because I realized how it went out when I tweeted it out, how people read it, and they probably just took it the same way. I'm looking at it through the lens of what the NHL's track record, the NHL Department of Player Safety, what I think they would hand out. I thought it would be either a game or a fine. That's all I thought. But what do I think it should be? Okay, I don't think that hit should be in the NHL. Like it shouldn't. You shouldn't be hitting guys in the head like that. And you should throw the book at those players. But the NHL hasn't. The NHL has no real standard that they go to. And again, go listen to the episode we had with John Scott. He talks about this guy who played in the league. Jay played in the league as well. There's no standard that the players know of and really that we know of either. So I was surprised that it was 2 games.
I didn't have a problem with it personally. I thought, again, I don't think Zadorov had any malicious intent, and there's of course a massive size discrepancy between Zadorov and Raymond. He's shown that he's, I think, a pretty clean player, and he just, when you try and make explosive open ice hits, on occasion you're going to mistime it, and that's what happened here. I didn't have a problem with the suspension. I thought it was fair.
I think you need to, and this is going to come across as maybe a little crazy based on what I just said. I think you need to suspend players for more than what Zadorov got suspended. Like, I think if I ran the NHL Department of Player Safety,
I don't know where you're going with this quad.
I don't know either, but I'm talking it through. Ty David in the chat said the NHL does need to reduce hits to the head because of the CTE risks. Okay. It's such a complicated conversation and there's no silver bullet. But I am for players not getting hit in the head. And it's a physical game, I get that. It's a physical game, but you have to do something about any hit to the head. And I go back to what we said with John Scott like 3 weeks ago when we had him on the show, or however long ago that was. I keep bringing it up. But what he suggested, an NHL enforcer, this isn't some nerd behind a computer like me. It's John Scott, a guy who fought and played in the NHL, saying, if you really want to get rid of these hits, you need to start suspending guys way overboard, like you did with clutching and grabbing, like you did with hooking when they brought all those rules in the mid-2000s. If that's what you want to do, you have to throw the book at these guys, and it needs to be very aggressive until this is out of everybody's game, until this is out of the game of hockey. That's what you need to start doing if you really want to make some sort of difference in the league and you want to make it so that these hits aren't happening. If I was in charge of player safety, first of all, I'd give Rielly like 7 games. Zadorov, I would have given like 3 or 4 games because any hit to the head should be an automatic 3, I think. But then you also, now I come into the conversation and I was ripping Nola Chari for skating like a Timbit hockey player through the neutral zone last week and getting hit by Brendan Dillon. I was criticizing that. So it's hard to, like, there's no silver bullet, right? But, like, can you start suspending guys for skating with their heads down? I think so. If I'm in charge of player safety.
You've taken, like, every stance in different points here. I'm trying to wrap my head
hard
around the point you're making, but
what you were summarize, saying, I have no point, but I have a lot of thoughts.
Sounds like a typical quad take.
Yeah.
No, but, I mean, yeah, it's easy to say. First of all, I think we all agree nobody wants to see headshots, but if you also go in and say we're going to throw the book and go excessive to get it out of the game, yeah, you're going to get it out of the game, but are you going to completely lose the physical element? Because it's not as if when you're playing, like Zadorov, for instance, the way that hit happens, and given how fast the game is, most of these guys are not headhunting.
Yeah. No, nobody's doing that. That's the thing. Nobody's doing that in this day and age.
So it's like if they create such an excessive punishment for these headshots, guys are just going to go, okay, I can't throw any hits.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's really hard fine line to balance, because let's say you go at Zadorov harder, well, then Zadorov might just not be a physical player, and then you might not get all those clean hits.
And you're also going to lose that player type, which is something I don't think is good for the game.
Yeah. So,
and we were just talking about it, like that was the last question I asked to Jay, right? Was how hard is it for a guy like Zadorov who plays physical to kind of walk that fine line? Hell, if I was Department of Player Safety head, or 2 minutes ago, the take I had, if those were the rules, then it's a hell of a lot harder for Nikita Zadorov to even make a living in the league, right? And look, Zadorov can skate, he can do all these other things. I'm not trying to say he's a one-dimensional player or anything, but Like, it's hard. It's a hard conversation to kind of navigate because there's a lot of different angles taken into consideration. Like, I think everybody can agree, okay, we don't want players suffering from CTE. We don't want players getting smoked in the head. But then, there's also the aspect of, okay, like, these guys do know what they're signing up for to some extent, right? Like, they know it's a physical sport that they're playing and they're compensated well for it. There's so many different angles that you look at. And it's just, yeah, I guess I don't have a silver bullet answer.
Yeah, I think to summarize, I had no problem with. I thought 2 games was a fair suspension for Zadorov.
Matt Folger in the YouTube live chat. Quad makes all the points and no point. Very zen. Very zen. I like that. That's all.
Seriously, on one hand, you're like,
throw the book at him.
Throw the book at him, but then you led with,
keep your head up, Nola.
I thought it was gonna be a fine or 1 game. Yeah, I don't know where you're going with it, Quads, but I get what you're saying. Like, it is a complex conversation. That's why, look, it's easy to make the Department of Player Safety a punching bag. It's easy to make them a joke, and yeah, they don't really have a standard of consistency. But also, every hit is different.
Mm-hmm.
Every incident has, like, it's impossible to create perfect comparables from hit to hit, from incident to incident. Like, these aren't contract comparables where they're numbers and easy to compare.
Yeah.
There's so many different factors you have to consider. And I'll say this, I don't care who you put in charge of that department. Nobody, let me put it this way. It's the same way we have conversations about officiating. Nobody's going to give you credit for a fair suspension. You're only going to get ripped if somebody thinks you got it wrong. And when you are enforcing a punishment, you're always going to piss one side off.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And
so I think it's an almost impossible job for people to look at and go, they're doing a good job.
Yeah. And people don't often say that about George Peros.
Yes.
Tough job. It's a tough job. Like, yeah, that is tough. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.